Hello, welcome to the video. When you think of the history of the United States of America, there is a multiple of things that come to mind. It can mean the signing of the Declaration of Independence in 1776. It can be the War of 1812. It can be the antebellum, the Civil War, or the Gettysburg Address. It could be the entering of the U.S. forces into the European and the Pacific during World War II. It can even be as simple as the invention of the peanut butter. Or it can also be about the polarizing events that have been happening in years prior to today. The point is this: the United States of America has a rich and complex history that is important to study. This video will serve as an introduction into the intricacies of the US history, as I will attempt to present the nation's story as raw and as transparent as possible. But first, let me introduce myself. My name is Angel, and I am currently pursuing my bachelor's in history with an emphasis in United States and Latin American studies. And in the process, I am also planning to obtain my credential in teaching social studies in the state of California. Now, I want to address a couple of things. The first is, why U.S. history? For many years, I've been subjected to many teachings of U.S. history, including the evolution of historiography of the U.S., going from the great man narrative to something more complex, focusing on the political, the social, and the economical histories of the nation. I will aim to provide as much context and as many interpretations to provide a clearer, though sometimes more vague image of American life. And that's because I was born and raised in California. And growing up, I was under the impression that the United States was founded by a nation of immigrants. That without the contributions of the multitude of immigrants of the United States will not have been fully functional as it is today. And while the US is one of the major powers of the world today, it still needs to acknowledge the groundbreaking innovations brought by the immigrants and the African Americans, making it a more perfect union. Secondly, I want to use this platform as practice so I can be more comfortable engaging in a high school classroom. However, I can't stress this enough. I will try to talk all about the US. This means that throughout the course of the US history, you will either hear atrocities committed by the Americans. There will be things that will be said that probably don't agree with your ideals and perception. You will hear and see things that will either demoralize you or anger you. This isn't a diss to you, and I'm not trying to ruin your perfect image of the United States, but this is meant to scrutinize your already inherent understanding of its history, because history needs to be scrutinized. That being said, take what I say with a grain of salt, and I highly encourage you to do your own research and create your own conclusion. If you think I misspoke or I got a detail wrong, let me know in the comments. But also cite your sources. I want to know where I went wrong, and I want to know how you got that detail. Speaking of citing sources, during the courses of these videos, you will see citations like this. I want to make it clear that I'm not just trying to the trust me mentality. I am not just a solid figure of authority, but this will provide evidence that I'm not talking out of my ass. That being said, if you want full links to where I get my information, just let me know, and I will have a works cited page ready, and that will hopefully help you on your historical journey. Now that we got that out of the way, I want to introduce the US by talking about the story so far. How did we get to the United States? This is to stimulate the mind and discuss events prior to 1492, because believe me, a good origin story also has a solid prequel. The first of which is the Spanish Reconquista, literally translated to the Reconquest. I like to call this the Spanish Crusade. This period was a Spanish attempt to drive a group of Muslims known as the Moors. The Moors were believed to be of Arab or North African descent, but whatever the case may be, the Spanish and other European kingdoms at the time defined them as people with dark skin or Muslim in nature. The Spanish did have different names for the Christianization of Muslims, but we'll get to that another time. The Spanish Crusade started way back in 711, not to be confused with the store, but it's the year 711, when the Umayyad Caliphate conquered the Iberian Peninsula. But the Spanish resurgence didn't happen until roughly the 12th century or the 1100s. Which, pro tip, if you don't know what century I'm talking about, take whatever they say, like 3rd, 4th century, and just subtract the X by 1, and then add 2 zeros at the end of it. For example, I said the 12th century. 12 minus 1 is 11. Add 2 zeros, you got 1100s. La Reconquista ended in 1492 because of multiple factors. The first was the merging of the kingdoms between Reina Isabella de Castilla, also known as Queen Isabella I of Castile, or also known as Isabella la Católica, and Rey Fernando II de Aragon, or King Ferdinand II of Aragon, and Rey Fernando el Católico. And they created the Spanish kingdom after they were married in 1469. In 1492, the Moorish Emirate of Granada fell to the Spanish forces and was officially annexed. At the same time, there were crusades happening all over Europe, so the Spanish Crusades was nothing new. They all had the same objective, though, to drive the Muslims out of Europe. But first, can we talk about the badass names each monarch had during the Crusades? Take a look at the First Crusade. The enemy was the Seljuk Turks. The Seljuk Turks have been conquering anything and everything that was in their way. And after capturing the Byzantine Empire of 1071, they didn't allow any Western Christians to visit Jerusalem, where Jesus supposedly is at. Emperor Alexios of the Byzantine Empire wrote to the Pope Urban II, because somehow the Pope has more powers than the king around this time. And he calls for a council at Clermont, and he declares the First Crusade, where thousands of knights, roughly 25,000 knights enlisted and successfully drove the Turks out of Jerusalem in 1099. And placed a guy named Godfrey of Bouillon. Yes, Godfrey of soup stock, as it were. There was another territory that was ruled by Baldwin of Lorraine, or Lorraine. Right? The point is, these two territories were known as Crusader states. And they even created the Knights Templar and the Knights Hospitaller, distinguished by the 8-point cross, also known as the Maltese Cross, or the Cross of Malta. The Second Crusade, after the Muslims decided to resurge and reconquer Jerusalem, was led by French King Louis VII and Conrad III of Germany. Now, keep an eye out, because the French and the Germans do not like each other. Right? And because of this, and because of constant bickering, they failed after being defeated by the Turks, and destroyed the Byzantine Empire in the process. The Third Crusade, however, there was a Third Crusade. The Crusades never stopped. The Third Crusade was called by Pope Gregory VIII. This is an entirely new pope in 1189, and was led by 3 kings with badass names. First was King Philippe Auguste II of France. Was Frederick Barbarossa I of Germany. And the third, Richard the Lionhearted. What? Unfortunately, though, these Avengers level kings were not successful, as Frederick drowned and Philip died, leaving only Richard the Lionhearted to face the Crusaders' target, Saladin, by himself. Because of this, Richard failed to recapture Jerusalem, but as a compromise, he did decide to make peace with Saladin, and Saladin ultimately allowed Western Christians to visit Jerusalem. There was another crusade, because of course there is. The Fourth Crusade, known as the Corrupt Crusade, had these knights be fooled and gaslit by merchants to attack Constantinople. And mind you, Constantinople was the capital of Rome. And while the Byzantine was able to retake Constantinople in 1204, Pope Innocent III, who called the Fourth Crusade, caught wind and condemned the holy fighters. But the Crusades, for some reason, was considered success. I don't know how. I don't know how. And keep in mind, these were 4 major crusades that happened. And there was many other crusades going on, including what was known as the Children's Crusade, because they thought, since the fourth one was corrupt because their souls were corrupted by darkness, by evil, by sin, they thought that, hey, let's send the fucking kids somehow, because they're just so pure. and then they were ended up sold into slavery. Okay, but eventually these crusades were eventually stopped by Pope Boniface VIII, as he declared a holy year in the year 1300, effectively ending the European Crusades. But the story doesn't end there. The story between England and France didn't stop because tensions were already rising between the two kingdoms since 1066. There was a war called the Hundred Years' War, and you could kind of guess how many years it took. 116. But this is because they were like a toxic couple. They would fight, lay an agreement, and then break into a fight again. And the fight was over territory. So really, they were just a married couple going through an ugly divorce. The first started between Edward III of England versus Philip VI of France. And they fought over a territory known as Flanders. No, not Ned Flanders from The Simpsons, but a territory known as Flanders. In Flanders, there was also a conflict between the Weavers and the Duke of Flanders because the Weavers resented the Duke because the Duke allied himself with France? I don't know. It was weird because get this. There was a vacancy in France because King Charles IV of France died in 1328, as one does, causing a power vacuum between two candidates who were fighting for their right to succeed the French throne. The first of which was Edward III of England and Philip the Sixth. So how did they decide? Well, Edward III was the son of Queen Isabella. I was about to say Elizabeth. Isabella of France, and King Philip the Sixth was a cousin to Edward III. But why was it complicated? Well, King Charles IV, who died in 1328, didn't have a son. Queen Isabella had Edward III, and King Philip VI was considered to be closest to the heir of King Charles IV because the French had this weird law known as the Salic Law, and the law basically bypassed the succession of the throne to the women and through the women. So men can't get nice thing because their mom cannot get nice thing because their mom is a woman. Yet King Edward III was closer in relation to King Charles IV because he was a direct descendant of King Philip IV, also known as Philip the Fair. My head hurts. Anyway, so because of the Salic Law, Edward III could not succeed the throne, and the throne was eventually given to King Philip VI. Fucking bastard. What made things worse, though, was the Duchy of Aquitaine was confiscated by Philip VI in response to Edward III letting Philip VI's enemy, which was a disgraced nobleman, seek shelter in King Edward's kingdom. Okay, but being the final straw, because Aquitaine was, important to him, Edward III declared war and attempted to claim his rightful place to the throne in France because now he's arguing that he's now eligible to be the rightful claim. Because as I said, he is the grandson of Philip IV or Philip the Fair. Again, my head hurts. Thus began the first mini skirmishes between England and France in the 100-Year War. The first war was won decisively by the English, of course. King Edward, now known as the Dark Prince, fucking badass apparently, became the ruler of Aquitaine, and they signed this in a treaty in 1360, drafted as the Treaty of Bretigny, but ratified under the name of Treaty of Calais. It was ratified in 1360, and it ended the first phase of the war. But after 9 years, 9 years is all it took, the war started again. This time a lot of the small battles were won by the French. Hey, fool me once, shame on you. Fool me twice, shame on me. But you didn't fool me twice. But the English somehow has another king ready. This king's name was King Henry V. Not the fourth, the fifth. And because of King Henry V, they were able to win a decisive battle known as the Battle of Agincourt, where English archers somehow, some way, destroyed the cavalry, the French cavalry. Right? And it resulted into the capturing of Normandy. So the first time English captured Normandy, and then the Germans captured Normandy. I just don't think Normandy liked the French. Right? But it all resulted in the Treaty of Troyes, which was signed in 1420, and he gives the following conditions. Should King Charles VI, because this time it's the 6th, I don't know what happened to the 5th, King Charles VI died, then the throne of France will be given to King Henry V. However, 2 years later, King Henry V dies. He leaves the succession to the throne to King Henry VI, because if it ain't broke, why fix it? And he became the next king. King Charles then dies, so not only does King Henry VI inherit the throne to England, he inherits the throne to France. But this newly unified kingdom was weak. And then comes in another unlikely fighter. Her name is Jeanne d'Arc, or more commonly known as Joan of Arc. Apparently, she heard whispers, as one does in medieval Europe, but the voices basically gaslit her. She was all there to say, hey, fuck it. You woke up ready to fight somebody, and you're going to win. And by God, she did it. With the permission of King of France, because apparently there's still a King of France, she dresses up as a man and led the small French army to victory in the siege of Orleans. Not to be confused with New Orleans, we'll get to that in a second. In 1429. The crown was then given to King Charles VII, because again, if it ain't broke, why fix it? But then in 1430, she was ambushed by the Burgundians, also known as the Germans. So not only does she get third-partied, but she gets tried as a witch. And because of that, she got burned at the stake. Europe is wild, man. But in 1453, the 100-Year War finally came to an end. England lost all of its territory and is now confined to an island, and France now reclaimed all of its lost land. This is the tip of the iceberg. In the years leading up to the Age of Discovery, where America started, we haven't even talked about the Italians and their Renaissance, even though they weren't really Italians, but just part of different republics and kingdoms. We'll talk about that later. But they did produce a man that will somehow become so integral to the start of the U.S. history. He became a retainer for the Spanish kingdom and somehow, some way, was given permission to find a route to China. This Genoese doesn't know it yet, but for the majority of American historiography, he would become one of the most important figures, as he is tied to the discovery of America. Well, one of the first discoverers anyway. Up north in what we call Canada, there were these Icelandic and Nordic men who was also documented as the first Europeans to discover America. Portugal was also working on a different route to China, and in the process found a different source of trading options in Africa, allowing for expansion and a transatlantic trade among the different European nations, which in turn became integral to the eventual American South. Believe me, we're just getting started. Hopefully next time we get to finally talk about the U.S., because there's so much to cover. Until then, class will be in session next time.